The more I work with corporate strategy practice, and over the last 20 years or so, that's pretty much the focus of my attention, the more I realise that the lack of capability in strategy as a system, as opposed even to practice, has been quite a problem for corporate leaders. It's an unknown problem because you don't know what you've got unless you've got it. There is a better approach to strategy. I've had a big hand in developing that. And I'd like to emphasise that, in particular, the CFO is the one who can and should be taking control of the strategy function. My name's Paul Hunter. I'd like to talk to you today about energising the strategic role of the CFO in the context of that rather bold statement. So let's look at the situation. The CFO is the individual who receives highest respect because of the accountability and the credibility associated with the work they do. It's a bit like the roadside assistant who is always there when your car breaks down. But better than that, the CFO role isn't about fixing problems, although most of it is spent looking back. They also have a task of responsibility and an expectation that they will look to the future as well. They are the go-to individual who CEOs, the board of directors, other stakeholders, and especially the leadership team relies on for that advisor of last resort in terms of providing sage, risk, financial, and by definition, authoritative advice. And yet, the foundation for that advice is questionable, mainly because it's nothing to do with the actual capabilities of the CFO. It's about the fact that they don't have any reliable strategy system upon which they can rely on for strategic content associated with some form of robustness and rigour in its construct. So the situation arises where the CFO is appointed to the role. They bring with them skills in historical analysis, maybe through an MBA program or some sort of education, an understanding of strategy theory, strategy concepts, certainly from experience on what the organisation has done to date, particularly that what we've done to date bit is deficient, to say the least. How can I justify that statement? Over the last 20 years, surveys have been undertaken, and consistently it's shown that 80 to 90% of organisations consider they don't execute, or as I prefer to say, implement strategy very effectively. So they tend to rely on SWOT analysis, coming up with an annual strategic plan, a static strategic plan, when what they need is a dynamic system, something that will let them see the future, take them to the future, and change direction when what they thought was going to be the future doesn't work out. Recently, the Global Management Accounting Principles Report was published by the abbreviation AICPA and CIMA, who recommend that the management accounting role, a very specific component of accounting, the accounting profession, is awarded a new lease of life. I used to be a cost accountant. I used to be a management accountant. It's a very specialist field in the sense that it's not looking purely at financial numbers, it's trying to interpret the numbers. Cost accounting is all about where the numbers went, where did the dollars go. Management accounting is more about having a say with the leadership team in terms of where the cost went, but B, where it should go, and how's it being optimized, how's the investment being optimized. But that's it. Now, with the arrival of AI, generative AI, digitalization, significant changes in the way corporates are expected to run and do run, there's likely to be a transformation in the role of the management accountant, and that's what the key purpose of the Global Management Accounting Principles Report, which suggests that they need to spend far more time looking to the future than the past. It's not only that they need to do that, is that they will have the time to do that because automation will take a lot of what they've been doing, certainly the cost accounting component, away. So this is hugely opportune for the CFO who is struggling to find the right source of data, the right source of information, but the resource to provide that information. So I'm pinpointing the management accountant as the profession that can transform themselves into a strategic advisory role that will provide significant, substantive support to the role of the CFO, and by definition, the capabilities and strategic decision-making capabilities of the executive team, the board, and everyone associated with the organisation, the stakeholders. That's not to say that the Chief Strategy Officer doesn't have a role. They do. That's primarily focused on intense, deep dive strategic analysis, however, rather than the operation of a management control system, which is, as a systems-based capability, corporate-wide, enterprise-wide in its context. So if we were to sum it up, we would suggest that the CFO is looking for content, data analysis that looks back, looks at now, and looks forward. The Chief Strategy Officer role is focused primarily on looking forward and providing that insight, the dynamic stuff, the deliberate disruption that probably keeps the CFO awake at night. In fact, if that's what the CSO is doing, that's all good, because what's conceptual is not necessarily what is real. Let's then have a look at what a CFO role might look like if they had access to better strategy concepts. I'm sure we all get excited about thinking about going on holidays as well as going on holidays, but it's the thinking bit, the expectation, the excitement. It's the reason people buy lottery tickets. There's a chance they're going to win $1 million. It might be worth $5. The anticipation of understanding the future, providing an expectation of what the future might hold, even as opposed to will hold, is exciting. It's invigorating. It's refreshing, and it's energizing. And that's what we're trying to do with a good strategy practice, energizing the role of the CFO. Rather than squirming when asked a difficult question about the future and having to guess, having to rely on intuition as your sole basis for advice, it's difficult. A good strategy system will arise when you have the right tools, the right technology, and the right understanding of what you're talking about. So yes, there are a lot of strategy tools around, but they're all independent. Take Blue Ocean Strategy as an example. A lot of noise was made about that in 2005, I think it was, when it was first launched. That's the only new piece of strategic insight that's been released in the recent past. And it's a lot to do with market positioning and not a lot to do with corporate strategy overall. And that's typical of each of these strategy tools. Great in their place, but not so great from a systems perspective or an overall corporate impact perspective. So we need to get them the right tools, the right technology. And here's where the management accountants come in. They have access to incredibly complex reporting tools, dashboard reporting tools that slice, dice, cut and shape data like nothing on earth. The only problem is it's all quantitative and it's all historical. So we need to use that technology to look into the future in some way. So that's proper scenario analysis. It's not financial scenario analysis. It's about stories of the future, which fire the imagination and have a large degree of reality about them. But then, of course, we'll look at in the next, it's about being able to adapt and invent at the same time. So the scenarios allow us to understand what's out there in a potential environment, create the visions, and look to the investment opportunities that will take us to that future, but then being flexible enough to change our minds, to change our investment policy, even if it's too late. So if 100 million's already gone, but you know that whatever it was that $100 million went into isn't going to work, then we don't do it anymore. Big ask, but it's the logical thing to do, the right thing to do. One of the key ways to or one of the new opportunities, one of the exciting opportunities is the arrival of generative AI. Digitalization was great. Generative AI allows us to project, to tell the stories, to create the stories. Those things that we can then unite the leadership team around to have the conversations that are structured and grounded in some form of believable, viable, legitimate content. And that's where the right understanding comes in. We can never know what the future is. It doesn't exist. So we're never going to make a right strategic decision. So we need to accept that. But we also need to accept that if we don't envisage the future and make it the driving force, then we won't be energizing anyone in the organization. It's about looking forward to a bright, optimistic future that counts, not commiserating over a dismal past. That's not to say, by the way, that CFOs or management accountants or anyone in the organisation isn't motivated or energised. Again, it comes back to the fact that we don't know what we've got unless you know what you can have. So let me look at the solutions. And there is a system that's devised. I had a fairly strong input to it, so there's a bit of bias here, but I've given courses in this idea of third wave strategy. I've talked to a lot of people about it, and it's been very well received as a concept. And I describe it as an integrated approach to strategy formulation, evaluation, monitoring, and implementation. So in other words, an integrated system that ends with alignment, by the way, because the fundamentals of strategy are rarely aligned. The whole system, another story. But one simple framework, and we can do that, and it's by interpreting all of the known strategy practices and bringing them together, binding them in place. In other words, putting a jigsaw together, a strategy practice, making it a system. But that won't work on its own. It has to be supported by, maybe it would work on its own, but without the learning capabilities associated with that, in the context of organisational learning, then a lot of what is understood will not be captured, and a lot of what could be known won't be taught. The crux of third wave strategy, though, lies in not just a framework, as we just talked about, but in getting to the known known from the known unknown and just the unknown. There requires a degree of critical strategic thinking, a depth of thinking, so deep strategic thinking, that has pretty much eluded us in the past. We've come to accept the idea that SWOT analysis is good and gap analysis is good enough. They simply aren't good enough, and they will be increasingly less valuable as time goes by. But the good news, of course, is that we can now inform and support our strategic decision-making with the use of generative AI, but in a cautious manner, please. You can get awfully lost in generative AI because it's about the future, and the generative AI platforms are based on analysis from the past. So there's a clear role for organisational learning in this as part of the culture of the organisation. The establishment of communities of strategy practice will help because they provide a formal construct within which strategic conversations can now start to take place. And the democratisation of strategy largely, in its ultimate context, that's open strategy practice, so that is, it's open to all. But we need to also differentiate between formulation, implementation, and communication of strategy. So we go to the CSO as the clear formulator of corporate strategy. But then we go to the CFO to be the individual who supports that role of formulation because they've got a lot of data and understanding of how resources can be deployed and how those resources could or should be redeployed, just as a starting point. In terms then of where that goes, that is the idea of formulation implementation. An enterprise performance management system made an enterprise strategic performance management mechanism will provide the leadership team with a monitoring mechanism that is entirely strategy focused, not just strategic, but strategy. The word strategic is very loose. Many things can be strategic, but strategy is strategy. So that's what we're focusing on, corporate strategy. And then communication, you can make it as simple as you want to or as complex as you want to. It's great if it's simpler because people can understand it, and that becomes the mechanism to create the enthusiasm and newfound levels of energy. The other final component I'd add to that is the human capital component of engaging everyone in open conversations about the future, an opportunity to share ambition, an opportunity to get a little bit emotive about the future of the corporation and having a say in that future. So that's all stakeholders. I think it's a part of a human capital function, and that again formalizes it and has a resource behind it that will drive the overall aura of knowing that we can't predict the future, but we can influence it. There is a clear need and opportunity for the CFO to have a greater say over the measurement, management, monitoring, reporting, and communication of strategy. The tools haven't been there. They are available in terms of bringing all those things that are independent at the moment together, in whatever format. But certainly the design of the third way strategy practice I'm proposing will have a big contributing factor in that role. The idea then is for the CFO to undertake and get involved in future-focused strategic thinking, using and leveraging management accountants as a resource, as strategic partners, and allowing, therefore, organisations to better navigate the uncertainties while driving innovation and long-term sustainability and renewal. In that context, I refer to the idea of the regeneration as opposed to renewal. Regeneration means that you're building the resource base and leveraging what you've got continually to continually evolve into the corporation of the future.